everybody for having me. So I will start now.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
All right. So my presentation is on the benefits and limitations of virtual presentation. Thank you for having me here. So I just go through quickly because I guess due to time constraints. My study is actually quite simple. Basically, what I wanted to really do was that I have looked at some of these internet-based tools, and we find that, and I think what we have also heard today from the keynote speakers and the various panelists, who was that internet-based tools are generally very commonly used in education now. I think one of the sponsors is Blackboard for this particular conference, and so basically the main thing that has been used in education has simply always been the online educational management tools, organized teaching materials like Blackboard, and obviously several others. And obviously teachers and instructors have also been using various other internet tools, for example, videos and other online content from the internet for teaching purposes. So we find many educators actually using YouTube videos to teach various things and so on and so forth, or documents that's available on the internet. And finally, I think one of the newer things that people are using now is to use social media sites, like your Instagram, Facebook, all sorts of other social media sites to facilitate learning in virtual classrooms. Basically as a way to network, to keep in touch with students, and do all sorts of things. So, but my view was that we have always been very focused on using on the use of online tools for teaching. Generally, it seems that there is comparatively less research being done on how people actually view, or how students actually view online assessment. So basically, that's the research question for me. For me, is to examine the use of virtual presentation on the internet in view of the traditional in-class presentation. So that was the idea that I had to basically look at some of the research on assessment rather than just the teaching itself. But this study was actually done a couple of years ago, so I just managed to collate all the results and decided to present it at this conference. So this study was actually done way before the COVID-19 pandemic, and was actually part of an initiative to embrace e-learning. Singapore, like many other countries, this is not the first time that we actually face pandemic. We actually, unfortunately, has faced several pandemics in the past, the SARS and other pandemics in the past. SARS was a little bit more serious compared to the other pandemics. Obviously not as serious as COVID. COVID was definitely a lot more serious as compared to SARS, but during SARS, we were actually closed schools for a while. And so therefore, ever since then, we actually had been, at least the Singapore government or the education schools actually been more focused on trying to, try to get them to get the schools to embrace e-learning and hopefully, be more prepared if such a situation does occur again. And I guess when COVID-19 came along, now we really realized that it was actually very important to have e-learning as a strategy. So this was actually done pre-COVID time. So maybe just an explanation of the background of this study. So what I did was I actually teach sports management modules. So education is really not my area of research. I only do a little bit here and there, but my main area of research actually is sports management, sports sponsorship. So you will please excuse me if I do not have a lot of theories on education. So anyway, for one of my modules, it was a sports facilities module, and students were actually required to submit a presentation on the current usage of sports facilities that were previously built for major sporting events. So for example, the Cape Town Stadium in South Africa was actually built for the 2010 FIFA World Cup. So what I at least wanted the students to do is to examine the use of the Cape Town Stadium or any other stadium that was built for a specific event. And after the event was over, do the government or do the people still use that facility? In other words, I want to examine whether is there a, white elephant kind of effect based on after you spend so much money building a stadium, what do you do after the event was over? So that was the general assignment that I wanted the students to do. So traditionally, what students would do was that they would prepare a report, and then after doing a report, they'll do an in-class presentation, and then after that, they will share the presentation with students, with other students will give comments, and then they'll learn from each other. So that was a traditional method. So I thought I would try something new, and I'll ask the students to do it online instead. So basically what they do was that they video their presentation, or they can actually do a PowerPoint slides, but basically they do something that they can actually upload, and then after uploading onto the internet, what they will do is that they will let other students view, and then they will evaluate. So in other words, instead of doing it in class, they will actually do their presentation online. So at the end of the semester, I asked students for feedback on the use of online presentation. Instead of coming to class to do a presentation, they actually do it online, and what do they think about it. So 34 out of 39 students in my class provided feedback, and I'll just summarize, I'll just show you some of the feedback that the students have actually given. Okay, so these are just a sample of what the students have actually mentioned about what they feel about the online presentation. So for example, the disadvantage of this method, the pace of voice will be too fast for the viewer to catch, and the viewer missing out some of the relevant explanation. Advantage is that it captures viewer attention using sound effect. So you can just very quickly read through. I won't read it through for you, maybe just very quickly. And perhaps if you are feeling very bored about reading, then let me just summarize everything very quickly for you. So basically, if you guys summarize all the 34 respondents, they basically mentioned, the students actually basically mentioned that the online presentation can actually be interesting, engaging, because it allows students to be creative. So some of the students actually did a little bit more than the usual PowerPoint slides. Some of them have other videos and animations and so on and so forth. I think the most important point that came through, I think you will have read from some of the comments on the previous slide, was they actually provide students with autonomy to decide when to learn and the opportunity to review the presentation when necessary. So in-class presentations, sometimes students miss out certain points, but they can't sort of rewind. But for video presentation that is already recorded, what they could actually do was they could play the video again. The other thing is that sometimes the students felt that it was very important to have autonomy. You don't want to learn it there and then, but you want to learn it at a time that's more convenient for you, more conducive for your learning. They can actually choose to do that. As for limitations, some of them find time consuming because students are actually less familiar with producing a virtual presentation. And obviously, it may also be less effective due to insufficient detail, because some of the students, they actually don't have a lot of details in their slides. And so because they don't have sufficient details, then what's going to happen is that the other students may feel that they are not actually learning from it. The other issue, of course, is the poor audio or video quality, which happens sometimes. And because of that, sometimes you can't hear what the presenter says. But if it's not in class, if it's not live, then what's going to happen is that the other students are not able to seek clarification from the presenters. So that seems to be some of the limitations on the online presentation. So I'll just conclude very quickly here, because mine is actually a very simple case study. I just want to examine the student's perspective on how they view such virtual presentations. But it seems that it was quite clear that most of the students felt that virtual presentations can be effective because it allows, this seems to be quite common, which is that it allows for autonomy in learning. They can decide when do they want to learn. So I actually mentioned that it's not bounded by the four walls, so that is something that is very interesting and useful for students. But I think some of the issues that were brought up was that the educators must also provide tools to help students create the online presentations. Because I think like one of the keynote speakers spoke this morning was saying that we cannot assume that everybody has the technology, has the infrastructure, to ensure that they go on to e-learning. You cannot assume that everybody has internet access and so on and so forth. So similarly, I think while we think that the young generation nowadays are actually very good at playing with all these online tools and software, but we cannot assume that all students have the same amount of technical ability. And so we actually need to have some simple things to help students do online presentation. The second thing was about providing guidelines of sufficient level of detail, because presentation, we are quite used to, as educators, we tell them, okay, 5,000 word essay, 3,000 word essay. But for presentation, we might actually have to come up with certain guidelines to tell them that, it has to have a little bit more detail. Finally, I think one of those things that what I did was that we just upload the video up onto the internet for people to view. So there wasn't actually a platform for clarification. Discussion was not a live section. It was uploaded and then allow people to actually just, download and watch it at any time that they please. But I think with COVID-19, because this study was done before COVID, now with COVID-19, I think a lot of students are a lot more aware of software like Zoom. I mean, this whole conference was also held via Zoom. They are more comfortable and they are actually more familiar with tools such as Zoom, where you can actually do live discussion. So obviously, if it's a live presentation, then obviously there's a lot of, you can actually have that, you actually solve that problem, because then there's the platform for clarification and discussion, which now if I end, then I guess if there's something that you like to clarify with me, then you can simply just, put in a chat, or you can just ask me questions online. So I think that resolves that problem. But obviously Zoom and whatever I did was a little bit different. What I did was just basically uploaded. So students can actually review it again, later on free time. But for Zoom, it's actually a live session. So you can't review it again or at your own time and pace. But if you want to, I guess you can just record it and you can actually review it. So I think that's it for me. I don't want to hold up everybody's time. So thank you very much. Any questions? Maybe I should stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Leng. I think it's time we have some time for the Q&A. So everyone, you are welcome to raise your hand and speak up, or you can type your questions in the chat box. The priority will be given to participants who ask questions verbally. So are there any questions from Dr. Leng? Oh, okay. Actually, I have a question. Dr. Leng, you mentioned that a student may not have the device or they don't have the experience to do the virtual presentations. So yes, what kind of support you or your university give to students if they said they don't have the device or they don't know how to do it?
Okay, so as I mentioned, this study was actually done way before COVID. So currently now, most of our students would have experienced Zoom lectures or Zoom presentations in one form or another. If not Zoom, then through various other means. I think, for example, for my university, we use Microsoft Teams. So that's another tool that actually people are actually using, at least in my school or in my classes, I use Teams. But pre-COVID time, during the time when I was actually doing this experiment, what happened was that students did not have Zoom, or at least Zoom was not as popular then, or Microsoft Teams was not as popular as a tool then. So what happened then was that we actually asked the students to actually use PowerPoint slides and actually do a tape or record it via PowerPoint slides. So that helps students a little bit, but there are still some, first time using it and they're not very good at it. So similarly, I mean, this morning, for example, I think, Carmen, you have realized that I was having so much difficulty in trying to share my slides, and I was having so much problem with finding the mute and the speaker button, because I'm not very familiar with Zoom. I only did a couple of, even then I've done it a couple of times, I'm still not familiar with Zoom. So sorry about all the technical glitches this morning. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we just have to, identify certain easy to use tools. Like for me, I identify PowerPoint as a way. And I think from now, maybe if let's say students are more familiar with Zoom or with more familiar with Teams, then we will just have to make sure that, we run through a simple session with them. Most of our students are actually quite smart. They're actually much smarter and more technical inclined than me. So yeah, maybe just some of the simple things that we need for them. Thanks.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Leng? Okay, actually, I have one more question. Because you mentioned that your students, they upload their virtual presentation. So how can you make sure that they have a platform or a way to interact with each other about their presentations?
So that's the issue. So when, like I explained just now, because this was done pre-COVID time, so what we had at that time, or at least the students were not very familiar with Zoom. Right? I don't think Zoom was that popular at that time. But what we basically did was that we asked the students to record all their presentations, and then they upload into a Blackboard. And then from Blackboard, which was one of the sponsors for your conference, basically what they did was that they download the information from Blackboard and they watch it at their own time. And then basically, then after that, what they will do is that they'll submit a review or critique of other people's presentation and then they upload back again. So what we tried to do was to use Blackboard as the online platform to organize our learning materials, plus also organize our own learning activities. So that was basically it. Because it was just upload, download kind of thing, there wasn't actually a platform for them to actually share. Obviously, we could have used some of the Blackboard tools which actually allow for online interactions. I think there's some chat forums and so on and so forth. But at that time, this was just like a first step in trying to do some simple experiments. So we actually have not gone so far into that. Going forward, obviously now with students so into Zoom and all the other online presentation software, I don't think we will actually go back to further this study using Blackboard or chat forum or whatever. Most of we just move on to Zoom or Teams or any of those things. Yeah.
I see.
Sorry, I must have spoke too fast, and that's why we have so much time for Q&A, and you have to ask so many questions. So sorry about that.
No. But I think maybe it's time for the next presentation now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leng.